inside Joe Biden's cautiously optimistic election night. CNN, the story of President Joe Biden's election night can be told by the two congratulatory messages he delivered roughly 4 hours apart. The first went to Republican Abigail Spanberger of Virginia, the second to Pennsylvania Governor John Petterman. Together, the messages represented the initial signal of the electorate that appears set to buck decades of American voters, delivering cascading midterm losses for the first-time president. White House officials were cautious early Wednesday morning not to lay out definitely conclusions, keenly aware that votes would be counted in the days ahead. In the West Wing filed with campaign veterans, the idea of drawing definitive conclusions when votes were still being counted and the key races remained uncold was, as one official described, a fool's errand. But on several fronts, Biden advisors said they viewed the initial result as early stage vindication that their multifaceted messaging approach, one that had drawn criticism for not focusing more on the economy, may have landed more forcefully than predicted. We have defied the historical trend, a senior Biden advisor told CNN. It's pretty extraordinary if you think about it. Just a historic trend bucking, another Biden advisor said. There are millions of votes still to be counted and three toss-up races that hold the keys to the Senate majority remain uncold. One of those, the Georgia Senate contest, will likely be decided in the run-up 1 month from now. Republicans still appear on the precipice of the taking the majority in the House, an outcome loaded with dramatically reshaped political, policy, and investigatory implications that Biden and his advisors haven't had to grapple with in their first 2 years. But optimism in the White House about the Democratic pathway to hold onto the Senate was real, even if it was tempered by the reality the hardest fought races still remained too close to call. Multiple states with abortion-related ballot measures all looked headed towards victories for abortion rights advocates, underscoring the salience of the issue Democrats sought to leverage in the wake of the Supreme Court decision to strike down Roe versus Wade. Democrats facing up against the election denying Republicans in critical Secretary of the State races were also either victorious or hanging on to leads in races to be the top statewide election official. Biden's move to elevate the centrality of democracy on the ballot that had drawn grumbles from some Democrats who were concerned it wasn't a driver of voter sentiment. And the Democrats also held onto the governors mentioned in the three critical swing states, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, were firsthood pushed by former President Donald Trump and his supporters about the 2020 election had been pervasive. But it was Virginia's seventh congressional district and the U.S. Senate race in Pennsylvania that truly made it clear. The midterm wipeout that had affected so many Biden's predecessors had not materialized. A big win in the DC suburb. Shortly before 10 p.m. ET of as Biden placed calls to the initial group of seven Democrats Spanberger's race was still viewed as too close to call. It was a race White House officials had quietly identified before Election Day was a ham- harbinger of the night to come, and they were watching it closely. Despite too close, despite the close rate were being close race not being called, Biden still offered his congratulations as the frontline Virginia Democrat started to widen her lead, giving the White House confidence the contest was heading in her favor. For Biden, Spanberger's win carried several layers of the significance beyond each broader signal about the political environment. A moderate Democrat who flipped her district in the 2018 Democratic wave, Spanberger is, in the words of the Biden advisor, the Biden kind of Democrat. She vocally pushed back against the progressive proposals that animated the party in recent years, largely aligning with Biden's more tempered view of democratic policies. But she also delivered a scathing critique of Biden's own sweeping domestic agenda in the closing days of the what would become a victory in the reliably blue Virginia governor's race last year. Nobody elected him to be FDR. They elected him to be normal and stop the chaos. Spanberger was quoted saying in the New York Times. The remarks caught Biden's attention, and he soon asked to speak to Spanberger by phone. Within 2 months, he was in her district holding an official event, even as other frontline Democrats had taken clear steps to distance themselves from Biden's sagging approval ratings. As the race turned definitively, it marked a critical moment for Biden and his political team, which entered the night with the view that there was a pathway to hold the Democratic Senate majority. They had campaigned by hammering on Biden's agenda and relentlessly framing the vote as the stark choice at hand, aiming to dampen growing talk of the red wave of Republican victories against the country, flipping a Senate seat in Pennsylvania. If Spanberger's race marked the initial signs of the more positive night than predicted, it was Patterman's that provided the exclamation point, with the Democrats clinging to the narrowest of Senate majorities. The Pennsylvania seat held by retiring Republican Senator Pat Toomey represented the only viable pickup opportunity in the handful of toss-up races that appeared to primed to break either way. That Patterman is very publicly recovering from the stroke he suffered 6 months, including a debate performance that led some Democrats to question his decision to press forward, placed a cloud of uncertainty over a race in a state. Biden flipped back to the Democratic column by a little more than 80,000 votes in 2020. But unlike so many other hotly contested states and districts, Biden never hesitated to show up in his birth state, and Patterman never avoided Biden when he did. That included the highest profile Democratic campaign rally of the cycle this past weekend, where Biden and former President Barack Obama teamed up with Patterman and Josh Shapiro, the party's candidate for governor, to make one final run at juicing turnout in the Democratic stronghold of Philadelphia. Biden left that rally bolstered by the enthusiasm he saw, one advisor told CNN. A personal data point of salt for the self-identifying congenital congenital optimist who never seemed unsettled by the democratic anxiety that became pervasive in the final weeks of the campaign. Yet he also didn't hesitate to lay out his view of the stakes of the moment, one in which the Republican center of the gravity had not shifted away from Trump in the 2 years since his electoral defeat. This is the defining moment for the nation, Biden said as he neared the close of his Pennsylvania remarks. Even as Biden made congratulatory phone calls to 35 victorious Democrats, he remained behind closed doors. A White House official said his calls had been wrapped up for the night, and while there was nothing officially scheduled, the first opportunity to hear Biden's views would likely come later on Wednesday. At last, the Peterman's race was called shortly after 1 a.m. ET Wednesday morning, shortly after a White House official passed along a simple message that wasn't subtle in each nod to Biden's repeated visit to Pennsylvania as other Democrats kept him at arm's length. The president had a great time with the Senate elect on Saturday, the official said. Biden's own electoral future will soon move to center state as he enters the critical period where he will make a final decision whether to seek re-election. Biden's 2020 opponent Trump has already made moves forward his own campaign launch. But for all of the uncertainty, Biden's advisors ended the night unsure that a sweeping red wave and the implicit indictment of their administration from which they fought to separate themselves did not materialize. Biden, for his part, decided to reach out to one more Democrat before ending his night. He sent a text to Peterman congratulating him on his victory. CNN's MJ Lee and Jeremy Diamond contributed to this report.